This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. Adam is going to look into this bear man controversy about who would you rather be stuck in a forest with.
That's right.
And I'm going to look at the life and times of early mammals. The other day, I was thinking about the extinction of the dinosaurs, as one does.
Of course we do.
And how that affected life on Earth. Primarily, I was wondering if mammals would have become so prolific and powerful if the dinosaurs hadn't been taken out. An impossible question to answer given historical complexity and contingency, but I still wondered about early mammals. I had heard they were small, mouse-like creatures, but what else, if anything, is there to know? Thus, today's segment, a brief look at early mammals, your distant relatives. First, let's get some basics out of the way. The word mammal is modern, from the scientific name mammalia, coined by Carl Linnaeus in 1758, derived from the Latin mamma, teat or breast. Could be pronounced differently in Latin, but that's what you get. There are about 5,500 to 6,500 species of mammals. Yeah, that's a relatively large difference in possible species of mammal, but classification, like most topics, is always partly up for debate and disagreement. It's no different for all this stuff. Regarding our size, mammals have a pretty large range, 30 millimeters, or 1.2 inches, in a bumblebee bat, to about 30 meters for a blue whale, 98 feet, as Adam might have mentioned in our last show, talking about sandworms. And the blue whale is possibly the largest animal to have ever lived. Asterisks with those dinosaurs. That's 1,000 times difference, though, between these two mammals that I just mentioned, the bumblebee bat and the blue whale. One could forgive someone thinking that these two life forms aren't part of the same group. But it always depends on what you count. As well, maximum lifespan varies from 2 years for the shrew to 211 years for the bowhead whale.
Wow.
That's 100-fold difference. Such a range, us mammals. Now, what's a mammal anyway? What you talking about here? Right? A mammal is a warm-blooded vertebrate characterized by several key features. Mammals have mammary glands that produce milk to nourish their young. Now, there are monotremes, like the platypus, that don't have nipples, that use mammary patches that seep milk. Nothing like seeped milk, I tell you.
Platypus is just weird.
Also, hair or fur. All mammals have hair or fur covering their bodies, which helps regulate body temperature. Even whale and porpoise embryos briefly have hair while gestating in the womb.
Oh, cool.
We also have 3 middle ear bones. I know that's what everyone thinks about when they think about mammals. Live birth or egg laying. Most mammals give birth to live offspring, but there are exceptions, good old like the platypus again, that lay eggs. And we also have a diaphragm, which is a muscle that aids in our breathing. Now, there's a couple other things, but those are the main characteristics. Now, where did we come from? Well, the synapsid lineage, which includes mammals, became distinct from the sauropsid lineage, leading to reptiles and birds around 320 to 315 million years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so if you fast forward a bit, about 230 million years ago, during the late Triassic period, a group of therapsids, which are mammal-like reptiles, suspicious namings, split off into the first true mammals. Now, the earliest known mammals were the Morganeucodontids, which lived around 210 million years ago, with Megazostrodon being a specific candidate of this order, which is a higher class for biology, for the first mammal. Now, before I share some details on the Megazostrodon, pronunciation you can write in, let's pause for just a brief moment and consider the concept of the first mammal, or first group of mammals, or prime mammal, before and after. So, of course, how did this happen, right? It wouldn't occur in just one generation, right? You wouldn't have no mammals and then suddenly full mammal, right? That doesn't make sense. And it'd be very odd for the first mammal to not have mammals as parents. Yet, over time, the transition has to happen somehow.
It's a bit of a chicken and the egg.
Eggs came first. You know this, biologically. So Dennett does talk about this as the prime mammal, the first mammal. And so this is the understanding of evolution. Over long periods of time, gradual change happens, and it's tempting to think there was a first mammal versus over, we'll say, thousands, millions of years, there would be things that are more and more mammal-like, and then you have mammals which are still reptile-like, and then you have things which we just call mammals.
Yeah.
So there's always these complexity about classification and what counts and essentialism and these sorts of things. So of course, eventually, there are enough of a certain set of characteristics, and not of others, that we say something is a mammal and something else isn't.
Okay.
Back to Megazostrodon. It was a small, shrew-like animal between 10 and 12 centimeters. So that's about 4.7 inches long, which exactly probably ate insects and small reptiles. It's thought to have been nocturnal, as it had a larger brain than earlier relatives, and the enlarged areas of its brain were found to be those that process sounds and smells. Good old soundy, smelly ancestors. This was probably in order to avoid being in competition with the reptiles or becoming prey to the dinosaurs.
So they just attempted to not be around.
I think so. And although it's considered a close relative of mammals, it did have some non-mammalian characteristics inherited from its predecessors, as it has to be, right? The first two vertebrae, Atlas and Axis if you're curious, were still unfused, and it only had 3 sacral vertebrae instead of the usual mammalian 5. Only 3 sacs in its vertebrae. And interclavicle is also present, which is still present in monotremes, good old platypus again, but lost in the line leading to therian mammals. These tiny shrew-like creatures coexisted with the dinosaurs, evolving around the same time as the dinosaurs, but lived in the periphery until their extinction and allowed the mammals to take a greater place in the world. I was curious about the different ways these mammals might have interacted with the dinosaurs, and of course, no one was there. There are some likely things we can infer based on their relative size, habitats, and thus behavior. So first you have small mammals, right? Generally small and nocturnal, they likely avoided direct confrontation with large dinosaurs to survive, and they might have occupied niches that dinosaurs didn't. They might be burrowing more, climbing trees more, or feeding on insects, and this allowed them to exist without being too much of a competition. Now, some mammals, small mammals, were probably prey to dinosaurs that were theropods, as I say, like velociraptors, or larger ones, like the good old T-Rex. And that makes perfect sense. If something has calories, someone's going to eat it. Yeah. But some larger mammals, again, relative size here, not that large, might have preyed on dinosaur eggs, or could have benefited from leftovers of dinosaur kills and used their burrows after dinosaurs had abandoned them. So there's all these different ways they might have interacted with dinosaurs. And, we don't have too much detail, but those are some of the ways that seem to make sense.
It's funny that you mentioned sort of like eating their old kills. Like if they're scavenging, then that would have made them more ideally suited to survive after the the mass extinction, because most things died. So it was the detritus and all the little stuff that was still around to eat. Right?
Now, were any of them like friends and they hung out, small mammals cleaning the teeth of large dinos, right? Because we see some of that nowadays. Like there's some bird that's like doing something to some other organism, like a crocodile. Who knows? It's impossible to say, although it makes a nice image. Why not, right? Sure. Just by the way, even though we're mainly talking about these mammals, they probably also affected their environment more broadly in terms of different seed dispersal, right? They eat some fruit, it comes out, and then disperse seeds that contributes to plant diversity and whatnot. But after the extinction event, that's when we really start taking off, right? So the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, which used to be called the KT, but they changed that, 66 million years ago, wiped out non-avian dinosaurs. It's always important to specify that. With the asteroid impact debris blocking out the sun, it reduced vegetation, which reduced the number of herbivorous dinosaurs, which then reduced the number of carnivorous dinosaurs because they had nothing to feed off. Mammals, which were much smaller, required so much less food to survive, they had an advantage. So you hold up in a hole, you got your fur coat, and you ride things out. Clearly, mammals came to thrive in a post-dinosaur world. Now, there may be a future segment where I talk about some of the larger megafauna, I think was it 20 to 40 million years ago. But at the moment, I just want to talk a bit about early mammals because it's interesting to think about where we all came from, so to speak. And if certain events hadn't happened, well, we wouldn't be listening to a podcast right now, would we, listeners?
It's an interesting idea, and I really like the idea you asked about, like, what would have happened if the dinosaurs never went extinct? We can't really know, but I kind of assumed that it would have stayed status quo for a while because mammals were around for a very long time, longer than the time that has passed since the extinction, alongside dinosaurs. And there was a sort of relative equilibrium where they didn't really get a chance to take over. And it sounds like they didn't really get their foothold until, the large animals were gone long enough for them to take their place. If dinosaurs came back, I feel like we'd just kill them and we'd wipe them out pretty quickly.
Yes.
Because we've had a chance to sort of dominate.
Develop weapons, yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, humans, obviously, we could hunt them to extinction, but I feel like, yeah, if dinosaurs came back, like, would they be able to thrive like they used to? I feel like they were lucky to kind of like, they got their niche and they held it for very long. But it's hard to It's hard to look at questions like that and assess exactly what would have happened, but I like thinking about it for some reason.
Yeah, for some reason. I was like, this could be 7 movies. I would watch every single one of these movies. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Well, we go from tiny mammals hundreds of millions of years ago to a slightly larger mammal, and by that I mean a bear. I've heard there's a question that has been going around the internet, maybe not by the time you hear this, but definitely before when this was recorded, about whether one would want to be stuck in the woods with a man or a bear.
So the question is, or the original question was, would you rather be stuck in a forest with a man or a bear? Of course, a man. What are you saying? What kind of silly question is that? Not so quick. This is the question which was asked on a viral TikTok video on April 10th, and the discourse which ensued teaches us a lot about base rate fallacy, things like that.
Perception, inference, and also substitution effect. Maybe we'll get into that.
Yeah. The original video from the TikTok account Screenshot HQ has a man asking this question to many women on the street. I don't know how many women they asked. Most of them in the video respond that they'd rather encounter the bear. The question went viral on Twitter, or X, and tons of women said, basically, the bear, suggesting that original video wasn't necessarily cherry-picking because a lot of people were saying the same thing. When I first saw this, I just assumed it was a funny joke, right? Haha, men are terrible, so even if there was a bear that has a huge chance of killing me, I picked the bear because men are that terrible. Ha ha ha, look, ladies, we're making fun of men, this is funny. Great. So similarly, I saw polls asking, like, they'd ask guys or the guys who were annoyed about this, if they'd rather be stuck in the woods with a bear or a feminist, and then guys would say, oh, I picked the bear. So it's like the same problem. Are they making a joke, or are they also being incorrect? I don't know.
Or would you rather your daughter or your wife encounter a bear or a man in the woods? I've seen that one too.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, I would say man, but
yep,
I have the whole segment to inform that. One particular video viewed by 6.4 million people has a man in a tank top doing statistical analysis. He asks Siri, how many people are killed by lightning? She says 20 people a year. He asks how many bear attacks there are in a year. She says 66 fatal conflicts with wild black bears since 1784. So less than a dozen non-fatal. He also asks how many women are assaulted each year. So 463,634 victims of rape or sexual assault each year in the United States. He asks how many women are assaulted by a partner every year in the US. 4.8 million acts of intimate partner violence or assault every year. So that's 10 times higher than the last number. So I'm not sure exactly how all these numbers jive, but so much to say these are very large numbers.
Yes.
And I do not dispute that these are large numbers. I don't know about the specifics of the numbers, though.
Right.
He tells men that if they still claim that they don't understand the argument, and I quote, "You are the problem. I don't even think that you're human."
So it's such an internet thing, right? If you don't understand, then like worst thing ever, right?
Yeah.
Like, am I a bear? Like, what do you mean I don't understand? I'm not a human. You're a mammal, you filthy mammal.
If my not being human meant I was a bear, then it's okay. I'd say this guy's not intelligent. He does bad statistics. We can nitpick how poorly Siri did in the video. Like she gives stats for black bear, but the numbers for grizzly bear are actually like twice as high. So there's actually slightly more bear attacks, but that's whatever. That's a little beside the point.
There are different bears, and maybe that'll come in later. Yes,
yeah, but the whatever bear it is, the number isn't huge. Most people are not at risk of getting killed by a bear. You are more likely to be killed by a human, man or a woman, than a bear. No dispute there. You encounter dozens to hundreds of humans, and therefore that many, or close to that many men, in a day. Most people don't encounter an uncaged bear in the course of a normal year. Darren, when's the last time you saw a bear, like, not in a zoo?
How about even in a zoo?
Yeah.
It's still not once a year.
No.
When did I last see a bear? A long, long time. Now, we're not talking about a pride parade, right? I think that's a safe joke. Listeners, you read it.
Yeah. Bears are relatively dangerous. Even if most bear encounters won't lead to harm or death, an individual bear encounter is much more dangerous than a single encounter with a man. Women, despite saying they prefer to run into a bear, still go to the grocery store and go to their jobs, and they usually don't jump into the bear enclosure at the zoo. Okay? You don't really need to jump into the bear enclosure. I live in a rural area. A few years ago, I heard something rummaging through the trash. I assumed it was a raccoon, or trash panda, that's what I like to call them. It was like 1 or 2 a.m. I'd often get raccoons stuck in my garbage can, so I went outside to see what was going on. I'd maybe let the raccoon out of the garbage, maybe get a funny photo of a raccoon. It was pitch black. I couldn't see. I approached kind of squinting, trying to see what was going on, see if maybe there was a raccoon. And then all of a sudden, I hear a bear growl at me.
Whoa.
Okay. So I had this like very very
deep, visceral,
very ancestral like fear. Okay.
Yep.
Bears are predators. Humans are like evolved to be afraid of bears.
Of that sound. A sound you've never heard perhaps in your life, and yet it conveys what it's supposed to convey.
Yeah, and I knew exactly what it was, and I got out of there. I got inside, and I didn't take a little photo of the bear or anything.
I just live streamed me running away.
Yeah. So then I went up to my room and I was in the window and I was like shaking, trying to take a picture of this bear.
Wow.
Through the window. So I'm not paranoid about bears. I don't have a phobia of bears. I don't do a ton to avoid them, but they're active around where I live. There's been bears in my yard and stuff like that. So I'd be careful to avoid one if there was one that was close. But I don't worry much about bears, even though I live close to them, because I don't often have a face-to-face encounter. Like that was the closest sort of close encounter with a bear I had, and I kind of went out of my way to see the bear. I didn't realize what I was doing.
Yes, out of your way going towards, but at the same time, like on your property, near your garbage, it's not that far out of your way.
No. And it was at night, so it's maybe less likely for me to run into a bear, like if I was just putting my garbage out after dinner or something like that. But that's also that's a concern. That could be a little dangerous. Sure. On the flip side, I approach men all the time. But you might be thinking, I'm not a woman. I don't have to be afraid. I am not a woman, which means I am much more likely to be killed by a man than a woman is.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw a YouTube video that tackled this, and the title, which maybe uses stronger words than I'm going to use in the show, was Man or Bear, the World is a Stupid Place Full of Stupid People. Looked at the statistics behind this. So the person who made the video says that they hike in the woods often and that they are bear aware. So they carry bear spray, are careful about bear encounters, but they're not careful about approaching men. And he looks at the statistics to show that men are significantly more likely to be murdered by a stranger than a woman. So 21% of males were murdered by a stranger compared to females, 12%. So it's almost double the risk of being killed from an encounter with a man than a woman would have. So he is debunking basically a video of a guy who gives statistics to suggest that women are twice as likely to be killed by a man than a bear if you're a woman in the U.S. Basically says there are 340,000 bears in the U.S. and 7 women killed since 2000 and 165 million men and 8,000 fatal attacks on women. So twice the risk, assuming you basically are always where bears are. So that basically adjusted for bear to man population, if you could encounter each at the same rate in the overall population, that would be true. But it doesn't really seem true in the real world. There are 485 times more men than bears, but you surely encounter more than 500 men for every bear you encounter.
Yeah.
Okay. I would argue that if you encountered 485 men and 1 bear on a hike, the bear is more likely to kill you. But that's also not a realistic representation of your actual risk. So I don't know if that's really that useful.
It'd be a highly populated hiking area.
Yeah, like if you're in an area where people are usually hiking, like the bears might not go there.
They'd be even less likely. Less likely to encounter a bear. Yeah.
But like I said, the bear was in my yard. I've seen bears cross the street. I've seen bears around where I live. Pretty often. There was a bear up in the tree in front of my son's daycare. That was a fun day. He wasn't there. He was with me. So the video's author analyzes the same numbers and does some simple math. And he says, really, the number you want to look at is total attacks divided by total encounters. So instead of the ratio of bear killings to the number of women, he does the ratio of bear killings divided by the number of female hikers, which is very different. Now, a hiker doesn't always encounter a bear, but it's more honest not to count women who are in a city and who are never going anywhere near bears and who are just not at risk of bear attack. So by his analysis, you're more likely to be killed by a bear if you're a hiker than you are to be killed by a man. Man attacks are much a higher number, but male encounters are also a massive number compared to bear encounters. So the math isn't sort of 1-to-1. It's not every time you encounter a bear. Like I said, if you ran into bears as often as you ran into men on a hike, that would be a very, very dangerous hike. And if you ran into men as infrequently as you ran into bears in the woods, it would be very safe.
Yeah, or very isolated, yeah. Either way. But yeah. I mean, I think we're going to get to it later, but I will say, one could argue, like, we're missing the entire point, right? this is not really what the question's asking by analyzing it this way, but we're just come back to that just for our listeners in case, yes, this is an objection that I think is worth discussing, but we'll get to it after Adam keeps going.
Yeah, so adjusting by encounter. You're more likely to be killed by a bear than a man. Now, I don't have specific numbers on how many encounters people have with bears, but that number's so small, it probably would barely even factor. So all else being equal, you're better off running into a random bear in the woods than a random man in the woods. And I think when people are asked this question, they're thinking of a worst case man, right?
Well, by random bear, you mean like all bear. Well, but bear type matters. It really does.
Yes.
But
yeah, your black bears and your brown bears.
Well, grizzlies are one type and the other ones just run away from you, right? So.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what the bears in the Gatineau Hills are, if they're particularly dangerous. I'm not really sure. I guess
that's the idea. But then that begs the question, right? When someone is asked the question, most of the time they don't ask for further specificity. They don't say, well, what kind of bear?
Yeah.
Well, what kind of man?
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? What kind of woods? Right? Because there are many bears that as soon as you approach, they run away. So clearly that's a bear you're mostly happy to encounter because you won't see it and it runs away. And as soon as you make a loud noise, it runs away. Then there's other bears. That's not how it goes at all.
Yes. And it is probably true that there's a high likelihood that a bear encounter will end just fine.
Yes.
Right? And I think it happens all the time, especially since the bear killing rates are actually pretty low.
Yeah, very few people are killed by bears.
But still.
Yes.
Yes. Because people aren't hanging around with bears every day. Now, surely a random man encounter in the woods isn't the same as a random man encounter at the self-checkout counter at the grocery store. I would also probably rather encounter a bear in the woods than in the grocery store. So the opposite works here too.
Yes. Well, I think... You turn an aisle corner with your cart, and there's a huge bear just there.
Oh yeah.
Now, if it was
food everywhere,
exactly,
he's locked in.
Now, wait. If it was a Care Bear, I mean, that's a good bear to encounter. If you're going to encounter a bear, a Care Bear is a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Or Teddy Ruxpin.
Oh, Teddy Ruxpin. He's an Iliop. He's technically not a bear.
Oh wow. But to be fair, I think some of the responses relate to men or people when they're not surrounded by the social conventions that may bind them alone in the woods.
Yes.
Might act differently.
Part of the concern. Yes. There's no accountability. There's nowhere to go.
Right.
The implication, whatever you want to call it. It could be bad news. Definitely. Now, the most likely scenario of a woman in the woods encountering a man in the woods is that he's doing exactly what she's doing, which is hiking. Otherwise, what are you doing? Where are you going? There's also these statistics about assault and intimate partner violence, which, it's a serious thing, but it's not relevant to the topic at hand. Women are at a real risk of assault by someone they know. This is terrible. Men should not be doing this. But these aren't random encounters. The question is about a random encounter. We have a disproportional concern about being attacked by a stranger when the reality is that the attack will probably happen from someone you know. Right? That's why it's intimate partner violence. It's someone you know well.
Yeah, that's an excellent point that is, at least in my experience, not well stated in the internet discourse about this.
Yeah.
And that would be a very weird question you could imagine, right? Would you rather encounter a bear or a man you know in the woods?
Well, and the odd thing is, if
it's
you're
worse.
Going to hike with someone, you're probably at higher risk to be hurt by the person you're hiking with than a person you randomly encounter, which is a little counterintuitive.
It's a big, bitter pill to swallow about the stats, but yes.
So women should be more concerned about violence from a man than from a bear. I don't think that's really in question. They are surrounded by men and interacting with men constantly. It doesn't mean they should not interact with or be surrounded by men, but, it's useful to be aware of that. It doesn't change the fact that encounters with bears are much more dangerous than encounters with men. Replace every man you interact with a bear, and every bear you interact with a man, and you'll likely not have a nice day at all. Now let's give an example that people aren't already biased about. Would you rather encounter a drunk driver or a sober driver on the road? The vast majority of car accidents, including fatal collisions, are caused by sober drivers. Therefore, if you encounter a drunk driver, are you safer? If you still don't understand this, you are a problem, and I don't even think you're human.
Well, yes. That certainly raises the caliber of the discussion by using their language. And I see your analogy. I think it's good enough. I want to put it that way. One could pick at it, but I see what you're saying.
So the discourse seems to be that guys who don't like the answers they're hearing to this hypothetical were hurt or insulted or offended by the question. Personally, I just thought a lot of people kind of lacked in intelligence, and I really didn't think of myself as a dangerous person from this sort of analogy and this discourse. My charitable interpretation is that these women who answered this question understood that bears are more dangerous and were trying to make a point or trying to make a joke. My slightly less charitable interpretation is that the more implausible statement or belief, the more strongly it proves your allegiance to some ideology, right? So some lukewarm statement which reflects the actual statistically correct dangers of male violence doesn't send a strong signal about your belief as a completely implausible nonsense stated belief that a man is more dangerous than a bear. Is that really what's going on here? I don't know. It might be a factor. The least charitable interpretation of this nonsense is that some people are really just not being intelligent about it and believe that they are statistically more in danger from a single encounter with a man than a single encounter with a bear. Would you rather encounter a man or a bear in the woods? You can have whatever preference you want, but choosing the bear means you're much, much more likely to get killed, whether you're a man or a woman, even though you're slightly more likely to get killed by the man if you're a man yourself.
Well, I think you've done a good job on a provocative, controversial topic because the stats are tricky. And I think it's also worth analyzing. Adam and I talked about this before, and I did my own little post about this, where as soon as I saw this, I thought, well, what a silly question. So I did some quick analysis, also intimate partner violence and everything else. It's like, okay, so you're more likely as a man to be killed by a woman than a bear. The stats. That's how it is.
Yeah. Yes.
If you do the numbers, you're like, but is that really the point here? And that I think is what's going on. That there's a literal stated question and a literal answer, and then there's what is someone trying to say? And so it could be that like, look, guys, yes, you're analyzing it, and maybe you're correcting your analysis, but that's not the point. And the point could just be women feel less safe than men realize. Right. That is probably like the most charitable interpretation. Women feel less safe than men realize. They are concerned about sexual assault, which does happen to them. And that's what they picture right away. They don't picture a bear sexually assaulting them. No. That's not what's happening. So if you ask anyone any question, their brain immediately tries to answer it in some way. And it doesn't necessarily answer the question that was asked. It comes up with whatever came into the mind. So availability bias kicks in. There's a long history, many examples, of course, as Adam indicated, of men assaulting women. And that's going to be very prominent. So in a statistically weighted way, your brain's going like, well, I have zero, like almost evidence of bear attacks and tons of evidence of men. So clearly the answer is men. And that is true for, as you said, most women interacting mostly in the world. They're going to be attacked by a man, not a bear. If you crunch the numbers, it doesn't work that way, which is why the question is sort of both intriguing and annoying to both sexes and genders here as they answer it in different ways. All I have to say is I think the numbers do allow for a statistical understanding, which is not what would be communicated or understood at first blush. That said, without the discussion of like, what question are we having here, someone's going to perhaps feel invalidated and the numbers don't really matter, because that's not really what this was about at all. Yeah.
And I think maybe it's important to highlight also, like, my analysis is mostly talking about being killed by the bear.
Correct.
Sexual assault and rape obviously you're not usually getting murdered because of this. So that's a different situation. And a woman's likelihood to be sexually assaulted, like, it's a high percentage in their lifetime. Like this is a real big, serious problem.
It's very disturbing.
Bear attacks is not.
Correct.
It's not common. It's not likely to happen. It's just like when we're doing these weird questions.
Like you could almost say shark, right?
Yeah.
Like it's like if you're swimming, would you rather encounter like a strange man or a shark? Now, as soon as I say it, like the shark attack seems so vivid because there's so many of those. And also, as much as men do assault women, it's not usually like while you're in the water at the beach. Like it doesn't come to mind as much. Yeah, right? It may not be likely. So right there, again, your brain plays tricks. And of course, there are so few people that die from shark attacks. You can do some statistical analysis on that. But I think, it's an interesting issue just to even see how people process it. I mean, if you really push it, right, as I said, I think, is it the issue? One of the things I mentioned was that is the issue that men are thinking of the Revenant and women are thinking of the Jungle Book. So like what bear comes to mind? And if you've seen the Revenant, like a bear attacks and it is very hard to survive a grizzly attack or anything like that. But not all bears are grizzlies, right? There's a wide range, as I said, depends on the type of bear. And the Jungle Book bear, of course, is very friendly, right? Baloo, he's very helpful. And a lot of black bears, I think it's black bears, that again, they usually run away. Maybe not your garbage though. So there's that pops up. Like, what are we talking about? So if it wasn't so loaded with like, obviously a discussion about like death, assault, horrible things, there might be an educational opportunity to talk about statistics. But with such a loaded topic, I think it's harder to do in person. I mean, on a podcast, sure, listeners let us know how we did. But I think interpersonally, you have to walk through several assumptions and qualifications and clarity before you even start to do the analysis. Otherwise, you might just come off as seemingly not understand the problem at hand.
Yeah, like I wouldn't bring this up as like a math problem to like a high school kid.
Oh, gee.
Because it would just like, okay, we're just making you think of terrible experiences. And your comment about sharks and not being afraid of people in the water kind of makes me think of something. I think people have this natural fear in the woods, and we maybe overlay a fear of a human attacking you onto that story. And maybe that was somewhat likely in our sort of evolutionary past. But our fear of things in the woods is also fear of wild animals in the woods. That's also a very evolved natural instinct. So I'm off in the woods and I'm just naturally a little bit on edge, especially if it's darker and I can't really see far ahead of me, dark forest type of thing. But my mind's going to go to, I'm going to get killed by an axe murderer because I see that in movies or something like that. When realistically, maybe I should be afraid of like a coyote eating me.
I was just going to say a coyote, like a moose. Moose can easily just kill someone. Now, I don't think they usually do. I mean, humans are sometimes dumb and they get close to mooses and they shouldn't. But yeah, there's a lot of large creatures or even smaller ones which could cause us a lot of harm that we typically don't think about. Unless, again, maybe you live in Alaska. Maybe you live out west. Maybe you encounter these more often. Yeah. Maybe you're more around, bear attacks, bear warnings, these sorts of things.
You might have mace or a bell.
Correct. Exactly. The bell, bear spray. Now, of course, like no one has ever said like what you need is like bear spray for every man you might encounter on a hike. Like people do carry pepper spray and they probably should, but it doesn't really make sense if you really start thinking it through, right? Now, maybe a lot of men are also feeling defensive because I, as a man, have gone out hiking by myself. I'm like, wait, I'm the bear? Like what? Wait, no. I'm like, well, everyone wants to think that, but that's not how the world goes. Sure. So, but yes, when I encounter a man, I'm like, wait, we're both each other's enemy now all of a sudden? We're just like, oh, hey, hi. It probably depends on, the culture, the country you're in, what you might expect, what time of day, all this other stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Adam. We'll see if we get any letters about this one.
info@trcpodcast.com, or you can leave a comment on the website if you want to get mad at me.
Thanks for joining us once again. I talked to you about early mammals, these shrew-like creatures, which are great distant ancestors that, because of what they were up to, we're here today. So let's give them some credit. And Adam explored the whole, if you're doing some stats in the woods and a bear falls, does it make a sound? Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.